Moving on here, Allo Conson, our friend Allo, has a question. He said, should Stephen Hawking and Leonard Mlodinow stick to physics and leave philosophy to the topically competent? Yes, they should. We're going to come back to Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's earned the badge of honor for this kind of debaggery, but yes, they should. They should mind their own business in terms of politics. Look, they have an opinion. They have as much right to an opinion as anybody else does, right? Stephen Hawking, who may be the most intelligent man, the most brilliant man alive today, has a right to his political opinions in the same way that a guy who, smokes weed out back of the 7-Eleven has a right to his political opinions, and he shouldn't be given any more weight than that guy, because Stephen Hawking knows less about human nature than the guy that smokes weed out in back of the 7-Eleven. Stephen Hawking doesn't have anything to do with people. The only people Stephen Hawking knows are other, astrophysicists. They're barely people. And if you've ever met any, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The people that Hawking and Sagan and Tyson and Einstein hung out with are not representative of the human population. And to derive algorithms and heuristics from these people, to use a language they might understand, is the simplest kind of false science that anybody who's not that smart could figure out immediately. Albert Einstein would say things like, you cannot simultaneously prepare for peace and war at the same time, or something like that. It's like, what the hell do you know about preparing for peace and war, Albert? You would be so wrapped up with your theory, which is the greatest single invention of mankind in terms of intellectual achievement, don't get me wrong. But you would go and knock on your own door and ask if the professor was home. You were so lost in the world. You have no idea about people. You want to talk to me about a person who wants to give me an idea of whether or not a political opinion? I'll listen to George Patton. I'll listen to Joseph Stalin. I'll listen to Adolf Hitler before I'll listen to Albert Einstein, because these people understood human nature and understood how people behave. They made a living at it. And I'll listen to sociologists. God, I've forgotten the name of this guy. Somebody please tell me the guy who co-authored The Bell Curve and Coming Apart. He's got a new book out called, I think, We the People. And people like that understand people. Those people have to know. Now, Cheryl Twomey says she disagrees about Sagan because he was the people's scientist. Cheryl, I hate to break this to you because I had the same reverence for this guy as you do. But Carl Sagan was exactly the same way. And I'll just give you two examples. Sagan knew that this nuclear winter that he was proposing as a result of nuclear war, Sagan basically said in the 80s, we have to have a nuclear freeze, which means let the communists take over the world and enslave everybody. Because the only thing that's stopping them is American nuclear deterrence. Let's disarm the good people and let the bad people run amok, basically, said Sagan, because if we have a nuclear war, it won't just be the end of the people underneath the bombs. The whole planet will die because of nuclear winter, because it's going to put up so much particulate matter from burning cities and aerosols and dust and all this other stuff that the Earth will experience the same kind of winter that happens after a giant asteroid impact, and everything on Earth will die. In other words, it's the doomsday effect. One bomb gets dropped, all the bombs get dropped, and then the whole planet dies. Sagan knew that this wasn't true. He knew it wasn't true, but he got in front of it. Charles Murray, thank you. But he got in front of it because he believed that it was true. He thought it was the kind of thing that we needed to be educated on, that the masses needed to, appreciate. Sagan had the mind to understand what a nuclear weapon is capable of and not capable of. And when people like that start talking about destroying the Earth with nuclear weapons, that's just absurd. It's back to the area problem again. A nuclear weapon is a big, big bomb, and it has some nasty side effects. But it is, when you think about the size of even the Tsar Bomba, was it 10 megatons or whatever it was, or 50 megatons, the biggest bomb ever developed? It's still, you're still measuring the blast area in square miles. I mean, the Hiroshima bomb could be detonated at LAX Tower, and the fatal blast areas would stay inside the LAX boundary. It's a big explosion, but this idea that you're going to just take the crust of the Earth off, which is what you were hearing about in the 80s, is ridiculous, and they knew it. Rich B313 says that it was Mount St. Helens that disproved the nuclear winter thing because it put an awful lot of dust up there, and the dust and the ash settled out, and here we are. And see, this is the thing that Sagan knows. Sagan knows that the negative feedback effects of the Earth's environment have to be enormously powerful. And all of the global warming people know this too. And the point basically to say about global warming is this. If the Earth was as delicate as they want to make it out to be, then the enormously higher levels of carbon dioxide, which existed 200 million years ago, CO2 levels were 3 times what they are now. No one's talking about, you're talking about 12% raise, 15% raise. They were 300% higher than they are now. And if it turned out that the Earth had this capability where positive feedback would mean it would run away into hot or cold, then the Earth would either be a molten slag ball or a frozen ice ball 4 billion years ago. It's only because the Earth has such incredibly powerful negative feedback that keeps bringing the Earth back to its current state of blue skies and liquid water that the Earth exists at all. And they know it, but they don't like the politics of it. So they lie. And Carl Sagan came up with something that I revered so much. It was called the baloney detection kit. He really meant to say the BS detection kit. And it was a series of tools that you could use to apply to any argument to determine the truth of it. And I thought it was, and I still think it's a wonderful piece of intellectual work. But he never applied the baloney detection kit to his own politics because he would have failed on every score. Are you an expert in this field? No. What data are you analyzing? None. Sagan would talk about the ancient astronauts thing, and he would say he'd hear evidence that sounded good to him, but it was coming from the chemists. And the chemists said they heard evidence that they thought was good coming from the astrophysicists, but the astrophysicists said, no, the astrophysics argument is nonsense. And the chemists would say, well, the chemical argument is nonsense. These guys think they know, and they don't know. And they think they're smarter than we are. They're smarter than we are in certain areas, but they're not smarter than we are in other areas. And in many areas, they're a lot less smart than we are. Sagan was talking about scientists being cool. Look, I've been a professional scientist, and I'm one of the cooler people in the conservative movement. But listen, just getting punditry cool is hard enough work. Scientists are not going to be cool. They're never going to be cool. Neil deGrasse Tyson thinks he's the coolest scientist in the world. He probably is the coolest scientist in the world. It's a fairly pathetic statement when you really get right down to it. There's nothing cool about this. The definition of cool is irresponsibility and lack of concern and care and cynicism. There's nothing cool about science. Sagan was talking about, TV episodes where people would use computer graphics to solve, the big technological problems, that people would tune into this by the millions. The fact that he wanted this to be true is undoubted, and the fact that he thought it would be true is also undoubted, but the fact of the matter is the guy doesn't understand the first thing about human nature. If humans were made out of the stuff that Sagan and Tyson think that they are, then we would be using this internet that we're talking on now for what we're doing now. We'd be using the internet to connect to one another, share our experience, become better educated. But that's not what the internet is used for. The internet's used for porn and computer games. That's where 98%, or watching movies, killing a few hours, literally killing time, just knocking off brain cycles. That is what people are. I don't have a problem with it. I just don't. I just have come to accept it. Would it be nice if every single person that had an iPad or an iPhone used the iPhone to get online degrees for free and end up with PhDs in astrophysics or engineering? Yeah, that'd be lovely. And there's no reason, frankly, why people in the inner city can't use their computers or their iPhones or their smartphones to get PhD degrees, but they don't use it for that. And that's human nature. And if you don't accept it, then you are violating every single point of the baloney detection kit, which is saying basically, I want this to be true, so therefore I'm going to believe it's true in the face of all evidence. Not just without evidence, in the face of contrary evidence. And this is where these people lose their minds. They lose their minds. I'm sorry, Cheryl. I know it's hard. I know it's hard. It was heartbreaking for me to realize this because it had an enormous effect on me. Carl Sagan, Dragons of Eden, and broke his brain, and a candle in the dark, or whatever it was. Incredible effect on me. But when he applied it to politics, he lost his way. And Sagan, as it turned out, towards the last 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 years of his life, was a tremendous pothead. He was a pothead. He wasn't just an occasional marijuana smoker. He was a pothead. And he would write himself notes while he was stoned saying, look into this, it's actually true. And then he'd get up the next day and he'd be sober again and straight. And he'd look at what he wrote himself when he was stoned, at this incredible deep insight, and he would say, I can't seem to find anything here. Well, you can't find anything there, Carl, because it's not there. You thought it was cool when you were stoned, like when everybody else was stoned. You thought, wow, what if a whole universe is like inside a molecule inside a giant's thumbnail? Wow. Okay. Now what? Is there any evidence that this is the case? No. Is it mind-blowing? It's mind-blowing the first time when you're 13. After that, it's not mind-blowing anymore. It only gets mind-blowing when you're high. You know, I worked in the Miami Planetarium, and the planetarium is it's driven by market forces just like everything else is. And because planetarium attendance and keeping the doors open to that science thing was based on market forces like everything else, in order to keep the doors open, we had to do astronomy shows and try to make astronomy palatable by using things like, the music of Kurt Weill and all of the genius that insane man Jack Horkheimer brought to the genre. But that wasn't enough to keep the doors open, and every year that went by, it got harder and harder to keep the doors open on the basis of the science. So starting in the early 70s, even before the laser shows came along, we started doing late-night shows where we would play rock and roll music, and I'll never forget this. Somebody want to look this up? My God, you want to look this up? You really experience. I was probably 1973. I was 14 years old when we started doing these late-night Friday and Saturday shows, and before we started doing laser shows, we had something for the Demon Haunted World. Thank you. We had a couple of years of a light show called the Heavy Water Light Show. And the Heavy Water Light Show were these two hippies. They weren't married, but they were a hippie dude and a hippie chick, and they both had equal-length ponytails, and they had a kid who walked around who'd never been in shoes in his entire life. He was 8 years old, never worn a pair of shoes, not once a day in his life. And these people would stand in the back of the room, and you paid this acid rock, and they had overhead projectors projecting up onto the dome, and they had these giant, enormous, like about this wide, looked a bit like a petri dish. It was a concave piece of glass, and they would have one, and then they'd have another one. And so they'd put like these oils in there, colored oils, and they'd squish them together. And then by squishing them together and moving around, they could make this amoeba thing pulsate. You got to see this kind of Heavy Water Light Show, this old kind of Jimi Hendrix acid kind of pulsating liquid kind of thing. And, and we did those shows, and I got used to seeing these shows from the time I was 14. I ended up doing it until I was damn near 30 on and off. Eventually we got laser shows in there, and Laserium came to the planetarium once. We never hired Laserium. Horkheimer decided to get his own laser show together, and we would do Pink Floyd, and we'd do the Police, and we'd do laser shows. They still do laser shows for the potheads, and I've seen the potheads come in, and it's, it's fine. I have nothing against them. It's fine. I don't care. I've had a couple martinis in my life. I understand this whole thing. It's not a big deal. But still, they would come in, and it's not really as interesting as it seems when most of your brain cells are gone. So there you go. So Sagan would say things like that. And when Sagan would say things like, I've had this incredible insight that I got when I was stoned. Look into this, sober morning guy. Write a note to himself. Sagan would not apply his own baloney detection kit to his own work. And that's when I didn't lose respect for him. It was just part of my ongoing, continuing education in terms of human nature. I don't fault him for being a human. He's a human being just like the rest of us. He has his own blind spots just like the rest of us. But he was a pot-smoking guy who lied about the science for his political gains. That was his blind spot. He thought he was doing good. That's how we always get into this kind of trouble. If Sagan had spent the same amount of time studying humans that I've spent studying humans, he would know as much about his humans as I do, and if I went the other way around, I might know as much about astrophysics as Sagan does. But it didn't work out that way. So, there you go.